So I was told that I have to talk about resilience. But before we talk about resilience, we really have to talk about grief, because that's the elephant in the room. Grief is paralyzing, it's disorienting, and it's so painful. You know, when your throat, it catches you in your throat. But as Jews, to help us on this journey and to reinforce that grief must be experienced in stages, we are blessed to have a roadmap. Rituals for grieving that leave relatively little to the imagination. It tells us, step by step, how to navigate those first few months of bereavement. First, until the body is buried, we are in a limbo state, which really acknowledges both the numbness and the sense of unreality that permeates everything. We're not asked to make decisions. We can't. In fact, we're not even counted in the minyan before the body is buried. It's almost an out-of-body experience. Then after the funeral, we have the Shiva period, when we're allowed to let all of that searing sadness emerge, followed closely by the Shloshim 30-day period, when we have to confront life how it is now, rather than how it used to be. Joan Didion refers to this time as magical thinking. When her husband died, she was told to give away everything, but she kept his running gear and his running shoes, because what was he going to wear when he came back? I'm going to wake up, and he's going to be right there beside me, or I'll pick up the phone, and she'll answer. Because grief makes us look and feel vulnerable, many of us really try to avoid it at all costs, at least in public. But it's hard to gauge when something will really hit you, especially when you do disaster work, as I do on a regular basis. So it was interesting to me that several weeks after I returned from Pittsburgh last November, our congregation brought Nefesh Mountain, the Jewgrass group melding influences of Judaism with classic bluegrass, for a concert. I was uplifted with the original songs, particularly moved by Donnie's description of finding a way to talk to God. Then they played Tree of Life, and I lost it. I sat in the front row in a puddle of tears. This song was dedicated to the Pittsburgh community devastated by a madman in October. Oh, sweet Spirit, hear my prayer. Help these words, help someone out there. I am but a voice, just a cry in the air, but I sing nonetheless in this pain we share. Oh, sweet friends, come and dry your eyes and hold each other by this tree of life. I'm angry and tired of this great divide, but I sing nonetheless with love at our side. Oh, sweet souls who feel broken now, we'll heal together somewhere, somehow. Time and again we have been let down, but we sing nonetheless, still whole and still proud. Oh, sweet Spirit, hear my prayer. Help these words heal someone out there. So many images came flooding back. Standing with neighbors at the makeshift memorials, visiting with families who had lost loved ones, brainstorming with teachers in religious schools and day schools about how to broach the topic of trauma with their students and their communities. Hearing the story of those who had chose to linger over their coffee and thus missing being in the crossfire by minutes. There were those moments of incredible holiness in the circle of the Chevra Kadisha, that amazing team of volunteers who gently washed the bodies and prepared them for burial, mitigating the damage by doing their extraordinary work. Helping the caregivers meant sitting with rabbis and cantors and educators and social workers and psychologists who had been working around the clock to restore to their congregations and to their clients a sense of normalcy when at the same time having to deal with their own grief. I hadn't finished processing my experience of grief from November. And that's when I realized that Pittsburgh will always have a handprint on my heart. So how can I help this really strong and healing community to develop its own resilience? We know that people react differently to common traumas, depending on their experience, on their past coping mechanisms, and their resources. And the impact of a communal trauma shows itself uniquely with each individual and each segment of the community reacting differently. It all depends on what you see. So it occurred to me on a recent trip to Petra in Jordan that perspective truly influences how we view the world when I came upon this rock. What do you see? Is it an elephant, really? Next one, please. No, it's not. It's a fish. It's the same rock. It all depends on where you're standing and how you interpret what you're looking at. And yet, there are, of course, some commonalities in grieving. My bereavement groups have taught me three main truths, which I wanted to share with you tonight and which many participants have experienced. Number one, grief is complicated. It's messy, and it's hard, and it's overwhelming, and it isn't a straight line, despite Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's groundbreaking research. It doesn't progress on a schedule, and it doesn't manifest itself in predictable ways. I find that the newly bereaved almost always experience what they call setbacks. After finding a shaky equilibrium, they hear a song on the radio, or they see an item at the supermarket that they used to buy for their loved one, or yet another shooting is splashed on the front of their morning newspaper, and then, once again, they're in that place of abject sadness. We imagine, we pray that we feel a little bit better each day and that by some miracle, the memories will be enough for us, and at one point, we might feel just a little bit less shattered. Just like in this first image. See, there's a beginning during which everything is awful, a middle part where you start to feel a little better, and then full stop, end of story, grieving is over. Mic drop. Unfortunately, grieving really looks like this. Notice that while it has a finite beginning, it has an arrow at the end. There is no end to the grief. The mourning will stop, but the grief continues in direct proportion to the love that we had for those who died. And grief takes time. Number two, and this is probably the most important, there are no shoulds in grieving. At Shiva, people counsel, you should really let it all out. You should fill the house with people. You should avoid the press. Don't say a word to the press. No, you must talk to the press. With the best of intentions assumed, others seem to think that what might be right for them is definitely right for you. You say you want to be alone with the family? You should let people come take care of you. You should empty the closets. You should get out more. You should move on. You should go to the memorials. Don't go to any memorials. You should. If you see the wagging finger, you know how that next sentence is going to start. Needless to say, these pieces of advice are not particularly helpful and often make the mourner feel bad about feeling bad. The only should is that you should survive this trauma in your own fashion, surrounded by whomever you want, even if it's nobody or nobody you know. Number 3, sharing your narrative in your own time and in your own way, in your own words, helps propel the healing process. I've learned that helping people to find their own resilience means giving them the space to nurture their own grief as they begin to create their story of loss. Resilience, which is a byproduct of working through the grief, individually and communally, is a process. It's not a goal. It is a daily and sometimes hourly effort to put one foot in front of the other. A dear colleague of mine, Rabbi Stephen Kushner, pointed out to me that the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, in the original desert tabernacle, didn't burn continuously, like magic or by miracle, by the hand of God. The Ner Tamid had to be rekindled daily, all the time, by us back then, and by you now. Every time you reach out to another who didn't expect your call, but really welcomed it nonetheless, you are building resilience in others. Every time you reinforce positive coping skills in those you love who are still here, you're building resilience in others. Every time you listen, silently and without judgment, to a story that needs to be told and retold and retold until no one else wants to hear it anymore, you are building resilience in others. When you lighten someone's load by just being present and not forgetting them on important days, like birthdays and anniversaries and cold winter nights and alternate Tuesdays, you're building resilience in others. And every time you think back to when the Jewish world, the whole world, responded to your pain, and you pay it forward by reaching out to communities on the other side of the globe, like New Zealand, when they suffered a similar loss, you are healing yourselves. You are lighting your own Ner Tamid. When grief forces you to pay attention to another one in pain, you are building your own resilience. We saw that in the delegation that visited from Parkland, Florida in April. By building bridges between these two communities, and bridges in this town apparently is really important, you each brought healing to your own community. Oh, sweet souls who feel broken now, we'll heal together, somewhere, somehow. Time and again we have been let down, but we sing nonetheless, still whole and still proud. Oh, sweet Spirit, hear my prayer. Help these words heal someone out there.
Farrell, thank you so much for those beautiful words and that nice kindness that you did for me. I will address it a little more in a minute, but first I would like to relate an occurrence that happened to me since I was first informed that I was receiving the Emmanuel Spector Award. Soon thereafter, I received a call from Toni Murray, who is a public relations executive at the Federation. She asked me to bring her my CV, a few other papers, and my photograph. I went to her files and I went to my files and found my CV and the other requested papers and a wonderful photograph of myself taken in 1981. I quickly took all this data to Tony. She took my CV and the other papers and then proceeded to look at my photograph. The silence was deafening. Maybe 5 seconds, but it seemed like 5 minutes to me when I heard her say, "I think we need a photographer." But Tony, I protested, the picture's only 38 years old. I guess I should have realized how much time had passed. I had reviewed the list of the previous Emmanuel Spector Award winners. The first award was given in 1953, and the total number of awardees up until tonight is 65. Of those 65, I have actually known 59, either casually, well, or very well. It seems like a small world, but I guess it's also because I've been around a long time. But in any event, Tony, all is forgiven. I am fully, truly honored to be now one of the special group of awardees. I never expected to receive this reward, and now that to receive it after I have phased out of all of my activities makes it triply rewarding. I very much thank the Federation and every person who was involved in making me the honoree. But I also would be very remiss if I ended this without discussing my wife Nancy's role in all of this. Through all of my endeavors, she has not only been supportive, but more importantly, she has been my counselor, my advisor, truly my partner. Her name belongs next to mine on this award. To add to all this night means to me is the great pleasure of having our daughter Judy and her husband David, who is an integral and beloved member of our family, here with us. Judy and David live in Denver and have intertwined their business careers with a great deal of important work in the Denver community, both in the Denver Jewish community and the Denver community at large. With all of this, they have provided Nancy and me with 2 wonderful granddaughters, and they are already teaching their daughters the meaning of philanthropy. And I must add, we are equally proud of our son Bill, who can't be here tonight because of an impossible conflict, but who has also made an important and significant niche in his community. I thank all of you for being here and sharing this night with us, and a special thanks to some friends who are close friends who are here on my account. For me, again as an old timer, it is, as the movie title states, a night to remember. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to take you back to the morning of March 17th. About 48 hours earlier, a coworker had alerted me to the attack in Christchurch, New Zealand. I was in a fog for the next 2 days, and now I was sitting with a young Syrian man who sat across from me and stared at the floor. He told me, "I watched the video online. He wasn't showing any emotion. It was like it was a video game." Less than 5 months out from our own communal tragedy, I thought that I had begun to heal myself. And Christchurch ripped open all of the wounds. His memories of the catastrophic disintegration of his homeland into civil war, and mine of the loss of dear friends, colleagues, co-workers, and of my illusion that we were secure in our wonderful Jewish community. It was a conversation particular to the Squirrel Hill Health Center. We're not a Jewish health center per se, but Squirrel Hill Health Center grew out of the Jewish Healthcare Foundation. Thank you, Farrell. And Nancy. We're a Federation beneficiary. We're in many ways a legacy to Montefiore Hospital's tradition of serving the underserved in all of the communities of Pittsburgh, including refugees, immigrants, people whose language or culture or religion serves as a barrier to care in many places, even if they have health insurance. And SHHC is also where our late beloved friend Richard Gottfried worked until the day before he was killed while he was davening with his community at New Light. I guess I've known for years that a conversation like this would happen one day, Last fall, just a month before the 18th of Cheshvan upended all of our worlds, I reached a major career milestone. Jeff mentioned my book, Healing People, Not Patients, and it was finally published thanks to a generous grant of support from the Jewish Healthcare Foundation. They keep coming up. The premise of the book is simple. People who heal for a living are in a relationship, Rabbi Harold Schulweis liked to call it a covenant, with the people who are seeking healing. Thinking of those seekers first and foremost as people, human beings created in God's image, demands a totally different approach to healthcare than our current model, which reduces a person to their diagnosis or even takes their identity down to their room number. The most crucial skill in this covenant is the ability to listen attentively to another person's story, to ask them questions out of genuine interest in knowing more. Well, my friend Martin often admonishes me not to ask questions I don't want to know the answer to. In the aftermath of a tragedy, of our tragedy, I don't want to know the answers. I'm not sure I can handle the answers anymore. But those answers are the key to helping the other person heal. So what was I supposed to do? My young Syrian friend is not the only person I care for to have experienced trauma. Trauma-informed care is one of the newest buzzwords in healthcare, and especially in mental health. Dr. Megan Gerber, who is the author of the first textbook on trauma-informed care for primary care docs, that's me, distills this buzzword into a stark realization. Depending on where you are, a history of trauma can be nearly ubiquitous. Well, consider Squirrel Hill Health Center's team to be fully informed. What isn't ubiquitous is what grows out of that history. Gerber makes the point that people who have been traumatized might be angry and frightened, jumping at a touch, snapping at every perceived verbal microaggression, even when the intent of that touch is to soothe, or that speech is to counsel. Others bury the trauma almost as soon as it occurs. Trauma can lead to chronic pain and disability. Some of you have heard me speak before and mention somebody whose back is bent into the shape of the lowercase letter R and bows over even further on the yortzeit of their lover who passed at the beginning of this trauma. At the other end of the spectrum, healthcare workers whose patient dies in mid-shift, thank you again, Nancy, for teaching me about this, return to work within minutes. I debriefed after my first experience of a patient's death in the stairwell of the VA hospital, only because the intern who was supervising me took 2 minutes to stop and check on me as we ran past each other on the stairs in opposite directions. Jewish tradition prescribes a middle path. We're supposed to find triumph in tragedy and remember tragedy in the moments of triumph. The Chevra Kadisha that Rabbi Stern mentioned, our community is blessed to have 2 of them, and they work cooperatively and respectfully with each other. The Tahara text compares the deceased woman to a bride, the deceased man to the Kohen Gadol. The Mashiach is supposed to be born on Tisha B'Av. The broken glass at a wedding tempers our joy with a memory of Tisha B'Av. And at one point in history, that wedding was probably arranged on the afternoon of Yom Kippur, right at the moment when every Jewish soul in the world is hanging in the balance. Tragedy and triumph. Saturday, November 3rd, 2018, the 25th of Cheshvan. 1,500 people crowded into the sanctuary at Beth Shalom to mourn and to daven together. And we ended Kiddush by celebrating the Sheva Brachot of our Rabbi Jeremy Marquis and his wife, Ilana Neshkes. They married on the 19th of Cheshvan in Los Angeles, October 28th. They were bound by the mitzvot to rejoice that entire week, even in the wake of unspeakable tragedy. And if it is possible to be both broken and restored in the same moment, it happened to me. And it's going to happen now. As I struggled to sing for the bride, Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. I was going to sing, but I can't do it right now. Do you remember that stark realization about the ubiquity of trauma? Well, Megan Gerber has something else to say. She reminds us that the healers also have a stark truth. Many, if not most of us, have also been traumatized. I spoke to somebody once who made the assumption that most of us who graduate medical school have had it pretty easy in life. Found out this year that that's not true. We not only need to be broken and restored in the same moment, we need to be broken and restore others in the same moment. Gerber might as well have paraphrased Martin and said, don't ask questions if you're not fully prepared to deal with the answers you're going to get. But we had to be prepared. We had to continue. The weeks and months that followed the shooting were a pendulum swinging between attending to the pain and suffering of those we had always cared for, tending to our own wounds. We had Rich's funeral. We had cookie trays and lunch. There was a vigil that was held for us by the Bhutanese refugee community in the rain, in the cold, attended mostly by people who didn't understand what was being said but knew they had to be there. And there was a support from Jewish Family and Community Services, the people who in calmer times usually call us for help to get somebody medical care. Their example inspired the lesson that I've taken from this experience. So any fans of medical Latin present? It's a small, thank you, somebody in the front row, thank you, Ken. The fans of that particular genre, it's a very small but select group, have heard the term furor therapeuticus. It's a term the great teachers of medicine often apply to their students who simply cannot stand to leave a problem unfixed, even if fixing it is at the great detriment of the person with the problem. The golden age of medicine dawned in the 60s, and it continues to this day, and it filled us with the belief that every disease could be cured, every hurt healed, and even death made optional. We learned to say no one needs to be in pain. As we become trauma-informed, we're learning to say what Rosie Greer used to say, it's all right to cry. Healers like me who have never properly learned to shut up now recognize that it's all right not to have the answer to the crying either. We just need to be present with it, name it, and share in the tears. Pittsburgh's Jews are now trauma-informed whether we like it or not, aware of both the ubiquity of trauma experienced by others and our own inability to escape trauma ourselves. It seems ludicrous to think that after the last 2,000 years, we would not only already have been so informed or so aware of how much we share with others, but individual memories can be short, and that feeling of stranger can fade when we aren't feeling so strange. Now, our immediate experience parallels that of those we support and of those we try to heal. Erica Brown, who came to comfort our community on the Shloshim, and who will return here later this month for the Fall Forum, also, like Rabbi Stern, takes exception to the 5-stage paradigm of grief of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Brown wrote a book called Happier Endings, and she contends that there are really only 3 stages: denial and resignation, and that encompasses the whole range of what Kubler-Ross talked about, and inspiration, in which a new life is formed, absent whatever was lost, but incorporating into it something greater that didn't exist before the loss. The inspiration stage is digging into that parallel experience to help others. Before the shooting, sometimes I would ask myself, what can I learn from my patients who have survived war trauma and are thriving that could help the ones that aren't thriving? Now I'm looking at myself and asking the same question, and how we might help each other. Answers have already emerged by showing support for our Muslim neighbors who rushed to our aid in October, by writing letters of support and grief and comfort to the families of Poway, Gilroy, Dayton, El Paso, and now Odessa Midland, by tapping the resource of our Holocaust survivor community to support our Hillel JUC students, and, I promised Lauren I would call this out, hopefully to begin providing support for the survivors, from members of our Bhutanese refugee community who also survived torture, ethnic cleansing, and helped that group heal from deep trauma. This is variation of the phenomenon known as concordance. Concordance says that people seem to show more trust and experience greater healing when their healer is of the same gender, the same ethnicity. Well, in the Talmud, it's in Nedarim 39b, go look it up, Rabbi Acha Bar Hanina speaks of a different kind of concordance, necessary for effective healing when visiting a sick person. It's to be ben gilo. So one interpretation of that is that they should be of the same astrological sign, but like Hebrew always does, it lends itself to other interpretations. Gil, age. So one of the same age might be more comfort than somebody who's too young or too old. Gil, joy. One of the same temperament, who takes pleasure in the same things, can provide greater comfort than somebody that we have nothing in common with. Gil, Now I'm going to start conjugating. Legalot, to reveal. If we're vulnerable, a little broken, and we're willing to share that vulnerability with the people we care for, then we can connect in a way that an armored stoicism or even a charmed innocence will not allow. Gluim, exposed. The media encampment last fall has made many of us feel exposed. But in that exposed vulnerability is our strength, our newfound ability to be there for each other. Legalot, to discover, not just to reveal. As in to discover strength we didn't know we had. Gilinu, we discovered this year what we already knew. We are surrounded by B'nai Gilenu, our friends and neighbors with whom we have a special Pittsburgh concordance. As Bo Nigale, let us show the rest of the city and the world what we have to share with them.
So it's not just my British reticence that's going to make me feel very humbled, it's for real. Thanks so much, Jeff, for those tremendously kind words. I want to share with you a few thoughts. The first is this. There's a fundamental Jewish principle that I've shared on several occasions with our staff team and at community events, Hakarat Hatov. It's appreciating the good. It's appreciating and recognizing the good that is also done for your benefit and on your behalf. So I'd like to start by recognizing and appreciating the Rudolph family for this tremendous honor. I'm truly humbled to receive this award. I didn't have the zechut, the merit, to know your beloved parents, but it's clear through the communal leadership of you and your children that we continue to owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. My thanks to the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, who provide the resources, care, and leadership to every part of our community. Thank you to my mentors and teachers, many of whom are here tonight. My heartfelt and enormous appreciation to the outstanding Hillel JUC staff team for their dedication in ensuring that every Jewish student has the opportunity to engage in meaningful Jewish campus life. Please join me in a round of applause to the fantastic Hillel JUC staff team. My thanks to the Hillel JUC Board of Trustees, past and present, again, many of whom here tonight, for their commitment and passion in enabling us to fulfill our mission and vision. To my wife and family, and I promise I won't ask for a round of applause for you, for allowing me to pursue the holy work that we do, and occasionally coming home in a bit of a grumpy mood when I do eventually get home. In Tanit 4a, Rabbi Hanina says, "Much I've learned from my teachers, even more I've learned from my colleagues, but the most I've learned from my students." That's a very apparent truth for me. And I can tell you the Jewish future is bright. Each day, I'm inspired by the creativity, determination, and commitment of Jewish students to make a difference in our world. I see the distinctively Jewish values of tzedek, justice, and chesed, kindness, that motivates our student leadership when they're planning their activities. I see the thirst for learning in the classes provided by our senior Jewish educator, attended by dozens of students each semester. I see the relationships blossoming and the Jewish confidence growing in Jewish students in their countless coffee dates with our fantastic staff team. I see the deepening meaning and relationship to Israel with the 100+ students we send each year on a variety of Israel programs, from Birthright to Onward Israel. I see the energy and the joy at Shabbat and holiday dinners at the Hillel JUC and on campus. And I'll tell you, every one of you is invited to join us anytime. We're creating Jewish memories. The Jewish future is bright. This is just a very brief snapshot of the work of our Hillel JUC. But just like any good organization, we're always looking to do more and reach higher. We want to engage more Jewish students. We want to provide more opportunities for learning. We want to have more Jewish students travel to Israel. And we want to develop even more leaders. So my final hakarat hatov, my final appreciation to the good, is to each and every one of you. Thank you for your trust and support in the Hillel JUC, and thank you for continuing to ensure that we invest in our greatest resource, our Jewish students. The Jewish future is bright. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Merrill. Thank you, Jeff. When the Norwegian government invited me just a couple of months after the July 22nd, 2011 attacks on the youth labor camp on the little island of Utøya in Norway, they asked me what they should do. In fact, they said plainly, just tell us what to do, and we'll do it. How do we commemorate these murdered children and the destruction of the government center? And I told them simply that I'd come to Norway not to tell them what to do, but just to keep them company as we figured it out together. I was thinking back to a similar moment in September 2001, when just a matter of weeks, about 2.5 weeks after the September 11, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center, on the Pentagon, and the plane that crashed in the western part of the state, I was also invited by the mayor, then Mayor Giuliani's office, and Governor Pataki to come advise them on how to memorialize these terrible attacks. And I was kind of shocked, to have been invited so soon after these attacks. After all, I've been working with the German, the Bundestag, and the Berlin Senate to commemorate the genocide of Europe's Jews some 65 years after the Holocaust. And here we were just 2.5 weeks after these attacks. And I had something similar to say. I wasn't quite as gentle. I said, these attacks aren't even memory yet. Something is still ongoing. We're still responding. Policies being made in response to these attacks, and we don't know what they're going to be. We don't know what they even mean yet. Only the families of the lost actually know what these attacks mean. And I said, in fact, maybe you should begin thinking about the memorial you want to make downtown in stages. Think of the memorial as having already started, not because you started it, but because it started maybe even in spite of you. Think of the faces you saw witnessing the attacks. Think of the reports you heard during the attacks when people watched. Think of the memory that nearly 1.6 billion people around the world had who witnessed the attacks live on television at the same time you did. The memorial for 9/11 actually began in those very first moments, how we remembered where we were at that time, what we remembered what we saw on TV. It began in the candlelight vigils at Washington Square Park and Union Square Parks. Nobody told anybody to go down there. Everybody just knew what to do. These are vernacular memorials. This is one of the beginnings of the 9/11 the 9/11 memorial. People remembering together. Perfect strangers coming together, remembering something that they may have saw and experienced in common. Think of the memorial as being composed of the thousands of flyers that appeared around New York City for the next 2 weeks. Have you seen my mother? Have you seen my father? Have you seen my uncle, my brother, my sister? Think of these memorials, these memorial flyers, if you will, as little epitaphs, almost like matzeva epitaphs. And here, the very first memorial motifs were also established. Missing, absent, gone, the people who didn't come home, the family members who didn't come home that night. I said, this is already your memorial. You don't have to do anything. You just have to expand your notion of the memorial to include everything that was happening from the very first moments of the attacks for the next several weeks. They said, well, what is it exactly we're going to remember? And I said, that's going to be up to you. But already, I think that there's a conflation of memorialization here. The buildings are being memorialized on the one hand, and the people in the buildings are being memorialized on the other. Most New Yorkers didn't know people who died in the attacks. But we all knew of the people who gave their lives trying to save people in the attacks. It was going to be very easy, unfortunately, for the families of the first responders. They knew exactly what they had lost. Ask them what the meaning of memory of 9/11 is, and they can tell you exactly what it was. How is their meaning going to be remembered differently from that of the people who were in the office towers on the wrong day at the wrong time? The firefighters who actually responded by having to walk the last mile down to the burning towers with 100 pounds of equipment on their backs, climbing 80 floors to save people, tell those family members what it is they lost and how to remember. I said, no, they're going to tell you how. We just need to be informed by their loss, and we'll get to the memorial that you're looking for. So time passed, and they actually took this advice in stride. They relaxed, they took a deep breath, they understood that at every stage of the recovery, of the cleanup, this was also another stage of memory. It was going to be recorded. Sometimes they said, maybe we should just stop the cleanup right here and let that be the memorial. And I reminded them that if they did that, that would be the way that the bombers themselves would have us commemorate these events. This would be a monument to their victory, not to our loss. And they had to agree with that, and they continued the cleanup. And the cleanup itself would now become part of the memorial. Some people said, let's design the memorial after the great facade, the Triton facade that got left behind. And said that too would be an emblem of destruction. And I'd worked, in fact, and reminded them that I'd worked with the Polish government around the preservation of Auschwitz in the late 80s and early 90s, in which I reminded them that to venerate or fetishize the emblems of destruction might be to displace the memory of the lives that were destroyed. Let's remember life with life. Let's remember loss with loss, perhaps, but let's not reduce the lives that were lived to the moments of their destruction. On the 6-month anniversary, they showed a tribute in light. It was first called the Towers of Light, and then some of the family members complained and said, but are you remembering the towers, or are you remembering our loved ones who died? And so they very gently and quickly changed the name to Tribute in Light, tribute to the victims in light. These two light towers, which had originally been conceived to be the birthday candles for the 30th anniversary of the World Trade Center's building. On the very first anniversary, names were called, and this is where I said, look, you've come to the place now where in Jewish tradition, you've kind of sat through the Shiva, you've observed the Shloshim, and now the time has come to recite the names in kind of a Yizkor tradition, if you will, and to raise and dedicate a matzeva. And here, in a weird way, there was no matzeva raised, but the entire site, the ground zero, had within that year been completely cleaned and repaired down to bedrock, but there was nothing there. They put in a couple reflecting ponds like this at the very bottom and invited the families to name their lost loved ones and then to bring flowers down and cast them upon these waters. And then how to begin rebuilding. They'd now taken a deep breath, they had paused, and now they began to try to figure out the rebuilding process and the remembering process. And as I reminded kind of our group today, the LMDC's triadic motto is renew, remember, and rebuild. So these are all conflated, they're all in one piece. And they began a memorial process. They asked me, well, what do we do first? Rebuild the World Trade Center towers, or do we have a memorial? Said it didn't matter which comes first. Wherever you start, the other one will follow. And sure enough, they called a request for proposals to rebuild. And Daniel Liebeskind, as you know, won this design competition to be the master rebuilder architect for Ground Zero. And within just about 6 weeks of announcing his winning design, they approached me and Maya Lin and Michael van Valkenburg and Vartan Gregorian and a handful of others to serve on a jury for a competition. This competition was open to the world. It was a blind competition. We announced it in April 2003. By the end of June 2003, we'd received 13,800 registrations, and by August, we'd received 5,201 designs. It took us almost 9 months, kind of a period of human gestation, if you will, to get to the winning design. We chose Michael Arad's design at the very end. And you'll see that his design was actually called Reflecting Absence. See, we're going to go through very quickly here to get to his design. The master architects had built losses and voids into almost all their designs without being asked to. This is Daniel Liebeskind's design. And then Michael Arad submitted these boards for our consideration. Let's see, I'm trying to get there. One more. Announcing the 5,201 design boards. We watched, we looked at 200 at a time, took notes, continued passing them on. We met every 2 weeks with the mayor, now Mayor Bloomberg. Governor Pataki promised us that he would not overrule whatever decision we made, the way that he tried to do with the LMDC in choosing the Liebeskind design. He chose the Liebeskind design on behalf of the families because he felt that the other designs were somehow skeletal and full of death, and the Liebeskind design was full of life. And after hard work, and with much help from Mayor Bloomberg's wine cellar, we arrived at 3 finalists, ending up with the Michael Arad design, which you will see here. Now, when we announced this design in January 2004, these were finalists that I will discuss. This was the proposed design by Michael Arad and Peter Walker. 2 gigantic voids with further voids at their centers, with white swamp oak trees planted in a grid, an abacus grid, creating, as they grow taller and taller, deeper and deeper volumes. It's called Reflecting Absence. It was to remember both loss and the regeneration of life around. We thought this was going to be the best possible choice. We wrote a rationale for it. And of course, wouldn't you know that the very first question I had after we made this announcement, surrounded by the mayor, the governor, the families, the firefighters' families, my very first question was, let's see, So you worked on the Denkmal, where you chose the Eisenman design. You've worked with Liebeskind on his Jewish museum design. You've written at length about voids and counter monuments. Haven't you guys just basically chosen another Holocaust monument? And it took me aback. And I said, well, no, of course not. But then in kind of trying to recalibrate and answer the question thoughtfully, I had to admit that in fact, all of Western culture in some way after the Holocaust had been inflected by this sense of loss, this preoccupation with the voids, and that yes, even a 9/11 memorial owes a debt to Holocaust memorials in which the voids and the absences and the breach of civilization are emphasized over everything else but life. So here we remember life with life and the trees, we remember the voids with voids, and we remember that these memorials need to be places in the landscape which we have carved out. We open up a space in the landscape that opens up a space within us for memory. And mostly I wanted to tell these, the powers that be, that there is no timetable. You take a deep breath, you open that space in time and place for memory, and there it will find root. Thank you very much.